Hello and welcome to the first Sunday gathering of 2023. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah. I'm part of the Circle team, and I'm really delighted to be with you here today. As I look around, I see many familiar names and faces, and also some new ones. I'm sure those who regularly attend will join me in extending a very warm welcome to everyone who has recently joined the community. And of course, that also extends to anyone watching via the replay. Today's gathering will include an opening prayer from Carla, live music with Dave, and our message will be from Emily, who will be talking about what it means to live a spiritual life. I'm sure you'll find it to be as insightful as it is inspiring, especially as Emily will offer 3 resolutions for the new year. But to get us started, let's join Carla in prayer.
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year to you. I'm going to start today's prayer with a prayer from the course, from our workbook that many of you will recognize. I can tell you that the first time that I heard one of our course companions, John Ruiz, speak about it, I knew I had found my church home. And so I'm going to start off with that prayer and then lead you into maybe a different way of extending that prayer as we go about the business of participating in God's plan for salvation. So if you'll bow your head with me, close your eyes, come into that inner space of peace and joining with God's presence. Know that He is here. Know that Brother Jesus is here. Know that the Holy Spirit is here. Let us begin. Holy Spirit, this holy instant I give to you. Be you in charge. For I would follow you, certain that your direction brings me peace. If I need a word to help me, you will give it to me. If I need a thought, that you will also give. And if I need but stillness and a tranquil, open mind, these are the gifts I will receive of you. Yet, Father, these gifts are not for me alone. You have called and I have answered. You have pointed the way you would have me follow back to you, but not alone. For as truth goes before me, so it goes before my brothers who will follow me. Let me forgive their illusions and thus my own, that I would see the simple truth in them. Show me how to serve my brothers while serving myself and set their footsteps on the way which you have opened up to us. Let me answer salvation's call to accept the truth, and let it go before me, lighting up the path you have set me upon. Father, let me forever remember that you have placed your hand in mine and have given me my brothers in affirmation that I am worthy of your trust in me. Let me dedicate my mind to the purpose of leading my brothers who seek the way but find it not, directing all my thoughts to serve the function of salvation. Father, I walk to you. Father, I walk to you now. Amen.
Good morning. The pieces I'm going to do today are both new original compositions that I've been working on. They don't even have names yet. I usually start by coming up with a couple of ideas and then I perform them, play them, refine them. So that's kind of the stage where I am now, but I hope you enjoy them.
Thank you, Dave. What a beautiful composition. Well done. And thank you, Esther, for the music prior to our service. And thank you, Sarah, for that lovely intro. And Carla, thank you for that prayer. What a marvelous way to introduce what I'm about to speak on today. So I will join the club also in welcoming all of you to our first Sunday gathering of 2023. I know that we have a lot of newbies here, so if this is your first time joining us for a Circle event, a very special welcome to you as well. We are so glad to have you here. It really is a lovely thing that we have with these gatherings. Thanks to all of you, we have this terrific space where we can come on Sundays that feels, as Carla said, like course church, except you don't really have to get dressed up or even leave your bedroom at all. So this is obviously the season of the new year. The new year is a season of rebirth, and the opportunity of this time is that it can be a new slate for every one of us if we want it to be. We can allow this time to carry a certain sacredness for us. We can use this month to think deeply about our own transformation and how we want to grow over the next year and beyond. Or we can make this just another date on our calendar that comes and goes. That's our choice. I know that we're probably all familiar with the phrase new year, new you. And while those words have become cliche, the reason why we latch on to this idea every January is because of the promise contained within it. New year, new you. New year, same old you doesn't quite do the job. And yet that is precisely what happens if we don't approach this season with the seriousness, and I would even say the sacredness that it deserves. And I think that's why I've always loved the idea of resolutions. Even if we don't always keep them, even if we set goals that are superficial, at least there was a time where once a year, we are all encouraged to think about what it is that we want to do to improve ourselves. And I don't know about you, but it feels to me that resolutions are headed to the global dustbin. It feels like they were a much bigger deal in the past than they are now. And I'm not sure why that is. I was with some friends in Ohio over the New Year's weekend. And when I said, what are your resolutions for 2023? Everyone just treated the question like it was a relic. Like I'd asked like where the VCR or the fax machine was. And I don't know, have you noticed that? Has anyone else noticed that? Yeah, it used to be that if you ask someone what their resolutions are, they'd rattle off 3 or 4 things. But now it feels like it's almost even uncool just to ask. My kids actually rolled their eyes at me when I was talking about the concept of resolutions. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to encourage us all to bring resolutions back for this year. And specifically, I'd like to give you 3 resolutions to focus on in the hopes that you'll make them part of your 2023 and beyond. But before we get into the things that we can do this year, I want to back up and talk a little bit about why we might want to do them. The theme for our gathering today is, what does it mean to live a spiritual life? And the answer to that question is, of course, to make your life about spiritual things, to make your life about spiritual values. That is the classic choice that we all have between the physical journey and the spiritual journey that we talk about here at the Circle so often. If you're on the physical journey, your life is going to be about things of the world that make your physical experience here more pleasurable, more safe, and more convenient. These are things like a better body, better clothes, better gadgets, more success, and so on. On the other hand, if you're on the spiritual journey, your life is going to be about the things of God. And so your goals will be aimed at being more loving, being more forgiving, being more healing, having more devotion to others, and so on. And I just want to be clear that to be on the spiritual journey doesn't mean that you don't care or that you don't pay attention to the physical. It just means that you don't put that first. Again, we think that if we get our physical priorities right, then our spiritual priorities will take care of themselves. but it's actually the other way around. It's when we get our spiritual priorities sorted out that the physical priorities take care of themselves. I was speaking to a woman this week who wants to move from New York to Asheville, North Carolina. And part of the reason why she wants to move is because she feels like that'll be a more spiritual place for her where she can focus more on her spiritual development. And she told me that she was looking for a place to live, but nothing was really coming together. But still, she decided to pack up her place in New York anyway. And literally, as she was packing, her real estate agent called and said there was a rental that opened up, which ended up being exactly what she was looking for. There are a million stories like that. I've got them. You've got them. The examples of a higher hand at work in our lives are everywhere. And yet, we have so little trust in that we feel we have to control and organize our lives because we feel like that's what keeps us safe. And it reminds me of workbook lesson 24. We do not perceive our own best interests. If we did, then we would let go of that need to control and devote ourselves to the only journey that really matters in the end. So let's talk about what that means. Let's say that you already know the spiritual journey is the track that you want to be on. So what does that mean? And this is where our resolutions come in. And I want to give them to you up front, and then we'll go into them one by one. So the first is truth first, ego second. The second is do the work. And the third is teach only love. So I've made them really simple so that we can all remember them. Truth first, ego second, do the work, teach only love. 10 words. We can handle that. So truth first. I was watching a video recently that Marianne Williamson did for the new year. And she was talking about the concept of the baggage that we have in our lives. She was making the point that when we say that we or someone else has baggage, what we mean is that we have an accumulation of stuff. Baggage is the emotional residue from anger or hurt that we can't fully process, that we haven't fully cleared. And so we carry it around with us in a way that weighs us down. And I used to talk a lot about baggage and emotional residue when I was in mindful leadership work. And one of the things that I used to do is I used to ask clients to imagine that if every grievance they held was a penny, how much luggage would we all be carting around right now? And the answer is, of course, a lot. And so what we need, particularly here at the new year, is we need a way to get rid of the old baggage that we're carrying around from the past, as well as a way to avoid accumulating that anger and hurt as we move forward. And the way to do that, according to the Course, is we put truth first. If you have made your life about the spiritual journey, then you have made your life about a commitment to something deeply sacred. Meaning, and I really want you to get this, your life is no longer about what you feel is true for you in any given moment. It's about what is true forever. So it's not about listening to what your emotions are telling you. It's about punching through the fog of what your emotions are telling you, because very often they lie, and getting to what is real. And so let's go through this. The introduction to the Course says, nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. What God created is real, and everything else is not only unreal, it ultimately doesn't exist at all. The Course says God created you and everyone else as a distinct consciousness that is, as we speak, safe and innocent and wholly loving in heaven, dreaming of exile in these bodies. In the end, that's all that's really going on here. That's it. We have fallen asleep and we are learning the lessons that we need to learn to wake up in heaven, and we're helping others do the same along the way. That is it. You may think that you're an engineer, you may think you're a project manager, a clerk, a grandparent, a spouse, but really all of this, all that we are, is a communication device for miracles. We are all just a means for expressing love to other people. And so instead of waking up and saying, what do I have to do today? Putting truth first says, I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent him who sent me. I'm not going to hold that grievance because God didn't create the situation that caused it. And so it's unreal. Lesson 155, which Carla read from in her prayer, I will step back and let him lead the way, says, to let illusion walk ahead of truth is madness, but to let illusion sink behind the truth and let the truth stand forth as what it is merely sanity. So what are we doing when we're letting illusion walk ahead of truth? We're putting illusion first when we look at other people and all we can see is what they did to us. We're putting illusion first when we let our baggage override what is real. And what is real is their true nature as a divine being, just like you. Safe and innocent and wholly loving, just like you. This doesn't mean that relationships don't break apart, but it does mean that no matter what happens, we can move through it with mercy, with love, with grace, and with kindness. In the CE, there's a story that Jesus calls a miracle where Helen didn't like one of Bill's friends. She intensely disliked this guy. And she thought this friend was a bad influence on Bill, and she had just a ton of bad will towards him. And then one day, another friend of theirs comes in and he's complaining to Helen about the very person that she doesn't like. And so the natural temptation would be to join in, right? But Helen doesn't do that. Instead, she sets her own bitterness aside and she helps her friend get over their misperception of someone that neither of them liked. So that's an example of what we're talking about here. Helen put her spiritual principles ahead of her ego, and Jesus not only called that a miracle, which is an expression of love that has a healing effect, but he also called it an act of integrity. So, of course, we all have that deeply problematic person in our lives. We all have that person we think is a bad influence. We all have that person towards whom we have generous amounts of ill will. We all have that person who has hurt us. We all have that person who threatens us. And we all have that person who maybe even despises us. Since there's only two emotions, love and fear, all that I've just described, the Course would classify as fear. And here's what it says about that. All aspects of fear are untrue because they do not exist at the higher creative level, and therefore they do not exist at all. To whatever extent you are willing to submit your beliefs to the real test of validity, to that extent are your perceptions healed or corrected. Now, the test of validity is a concept I want you to understand. This is a remarkable tool that we can all use right now to decide whether we're putting truth first. So what you do is you take what you're thinking in any given moment. This person is a bad influence. This person is my enemy. I can't stand the way this person chews in my ear. And you compare your beliefs to the higher level of creation. Did God create it? And then you let go of what isn't real. And we've just learned that only what God creates is real. So you take your beliefs, you compare it to, did God create it? And if he didn't create it, it's not real. This is how the Course says that we can sort out the false from the true. We can make the test of validity a bedrock principle in our lives if we are willing. So we can consistently ask ourselves, did God create us? Did God create this? What's real here? What's eternally true? And what is just my fleeting perception? This can be one of our greatest spiritual tools, again, if we let it. God's truth first, your ego second, not the other way around. So we can use this time to make a commitment to that, and then to allow a desire for truth to become not only our goal for seeing, but the container for our lives overall. So that's the first resolution. The second resolution I'd like to talk to you about is do the work. Now, this is a phrase that has become very popular these days, do the work. And I think that's a good thing because it captures the seriousness that's needed when it comes to personal change. That said, the concept of doing work has fallen out of fashion in contemporary spirituality. It's actually a little worse than that. Sometimes what we hear is that the thing to watch out for is doing the work. Like doing work is a sign that you don't get what it is to be truly spiritual. And that's why so much of the mood and so much of the energy of spiritualities these days is going towards not trying, because trying is striving, not doing the lessons because they're heady or intellectual. How many of you have heard that? And so this ecology of practice that the Course offers us gets boiled down to the sense that the work is just to be. And I think there's a place for that. As many of you know, my all-time favorite workbook lesson is 109, I Rest in God. But a question to honestly ask ourselves is, are we celebrating not doing the work as a way to avoid doing the work? One of the most quoted lines in the Course is, forget this world, forget this course, and come with wholly empty hands unto your God. Why do we love that line so much? Why do we, as course students, rally around the phrase, forget this course? And that last line isn't really asking us to forget the course anyway. It's a meditation instruction. It's a directive on how to clear our mind so that we can come unto God in meditation. And yet it's constantly cited as justification for why the Course isn't really asking us to do what the Course is asking us to do. In the Course, there's a real understanding that human transformation is a slow process. It is true. Course says that we can wake up in an instant if we choose, but it doesn't work that way for most of us. And so what the Course wants us to do is to train our minds through a whole process of undoing the way that we see now, and then restoring our ability to see the holiness in all things. This is what the Course calls vision. For those of you who maybe listened to the live podcast recordings, you know that Robert and I recently completed a 6-week series on the 10 traits of the spiritually advanced from the Manual for Teachers. And one theme that we kept repeating in that series is that the Course is less interested in our heightened spiritual states, meaning our revelatory experiences and our just blowout meditations, than it is interested in our heightened spiritual traits. And we know this is true because otherwise there would be sections in the Course on how to have psychic experiences, and Jesus would be applauding Helen's amazing inner visions, which she absolutely had. Helen had incredible inner visions, but Jesus didn't talk about those. Instead, remember the example that I shared with you earlier about her putting her spiritual principles first? Jesus applauded that. Jesus applauded her integrity. Jesus applauded her ability to be a miracle worker, to express love to others. That's what he was encouraging and celebrating in her, not her psychic and spiritual abilities, which were massive. So in the Course, being a person of good character is spiritually advanced. Being a good person is the way to get to those heightened spiritual states. And in the Course, the work is daily exercises of just good old-fashioned mental repetition. So in the workbook of the Course, it says, quote, a theoretical foundation such as the text is necessary as a background to make the exercises in this workbook meaningful. It is the exercises that will make the goal of the Course possible. An untrained mind can accomplish nothing. It is the purpose of these exercises to train the mind to think along the lines the course sets forth. And the introduction goes on to say that the purpose of the workbook is to train our mind in a systematic way to a different perception of everything in the world. A systematic way. So there's two things to note here. And again, both of them do tend to go against contemporary spiritual trends. Number one, spiritual development is the development of character. I don't care if you can levitate. If your ego is still running the show, from a course perspective, you are not in a state of true spiritual advancement. Number two, the development of character comes from placing a value on doing the work, not placing the value on not doing the work. It's a very clever thing what we've done, elevating our avoidance of practice to a spiritual virtue. And we really need to take a look at that, because if we don't value the work, then we won't do it, and then we won't make any progress. New year, same old you. Robert came across this great quote from a guest on the Theories of Everything podcast, who was talking about how Buddhism has been distorted in the West by the popularizers. And so this is a similar issue. Specifically, in this quote, the guest on the show is taking aim at just how it's taking aim at how a grand and rich tradition like Buddhism has been shrunk down to an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction class. And those classes, as we all know, are so popular right now. I actually used to teach them. So here's what he says, talking about the popularizers. And listen carefully to this. He's saying, I don't think they're sinister. I think they're responding to a very powerful cultural imperative, a market boom. But can we cut to the chase of what this is all about? What's the basic practice? How can I make this work as simply and as effectively as possible? And so you reduce all of mindfulness, let alone Buddhism, you reduce it all to one thing, seated meditation. And he says, that is ridiculous. Compared to doing nothing, seated meditation is great. But if we want to transform something as dynamic and complex as a self within a community of persons, within a culture, you got to do something way more powerful. It's easy to market mindfulness for stress reduction so that you become a very contented corporate drone. It's easy to market, and that's easy to sell, and it's easy to get people to jump on board because you get an immediate effect. Stress reduction will work in 8 weeks. It does. But, and here's the important part, transforming your character, bringing about the cultivation of wisdom. Do you really think you're going to get that in 8 weeks? Can you learn to play a musical instrument in 8 weeks? Can you learn to be a martial artist in 8 weeks? Come on. It's ridiculous to believe that. Now, I happen to love 8-week mindfulness meditation courses because I taught them again, and you have to start somewhere. But I also think that his larger point is valid. We can't think that transforming something as complex as the self will happen unless we approach it with the seriousness that, for example, a musician brings to his or her craft. Robert's son is 15. Robert's son, Michael, is 15. He just turned 15 this week. And he plays in a youth strings orchestra. And he's so serious about music that he practices every day. He's being taught by professional musicians. He's constantly watching these YouTube videos on how to play things. He's reading and buying coffee table books on the history of music. And the payoff is that he's good enough to take part in that youth orchestra. And if he keeps at it, he will be good enough to be in an adult orchestra. I don't know if that's his goal, but the point is that he is not sitting back waiting for his musical gifts to come to him. He's doing the work and he's seeing the results. And that's because in the culture of music, the value is placed on the practice. Michael plays violin and he plays piano, and he was telling me recently that his goal before any performance is to have rehearsed the piece so much that it becomes automatic. He says he wants the piece to be muscle memory. And in fact, just funny side story, he had a performance at school recently and he left his sheet music at home. And he totally didn't even realize that he had forgotten his music until 15 minutes before he was supposed to be on stage. I mean, it was big. It was fellow students, it was parents, it was everything. And so he played the piece. He played the piece without the sheet music, and he only had one hiccup. He said no one noticed it, but he said that he had one hiccup. So that's pretty amazing. Why don't we place the same value on practice in the spiritual community? Why isn't the conversation around the course, I'm going to do the practice until it becomes muscle memory and so automatic that I just respond to any trigger with love instead of anger? So Robert is on his way over here to Charlotte today, and I have to laugh, and I had to put this into the message for today because this morning before he left, I was telling him about this part of the sermon. I was going to share the story about Michael, and Robert said to me, well, you should also tell them that you're not exactly in the realm of muscle memory. He was like, don't make it seem like you're on the mountain shooting arrows at people who aren't doing the practice, which I thought was hilarious because it's true. I'm pretty good at keeping a drumbeat of the practice going throughout the day, but I'm by no means at the level of a professional classical musician. But that's the beauty of the new year. Jesus said to Helen once, there will never be a time when I do not will to try again. You might be gladdened by remembering that. And so this is the season in which we honor trying again. We can all make this a year where we are committed to getting it right, where we don't dismiss or avoid what it is that we're asking to do in the course, but instead we give ourselves to it fully and we experience the transformation it promises. So my final resolution is teach only love. In the course, there is a message of the crucifixion and a message of the resurrection, and both of them are stunning. The message of the resurrection is that nothing can destroy truth, which means that Jesus showing up completely unharmed on Easter morning proved that he, and by extension all of us, cannot be hurt, even by the worst of what this world can do. And the message of the resurrection is teach only love. On the cross, Jesus famously said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And it's unbelievable to us that after all that he had been through, the savage beating, the carrying of his own cross, the insults, the betrayal from his own disciples, that while he was hanging there dying, he could ask God to forgive the people who murdered him. And the idea, of course, is that he went through the most extreme suffering. Again, he went through the worst of what the world can do. And if he was able to forgive under those circumstances, then we should be able to forgive under the comparatively small suffering of our own lives. And there's two passages that I want to read on this. Both of these are from the message of the crucifixion section. The first says, you are not asked to be crucified, because that was part of my own teaching contribution. You are merely asked to follow my example in the face of much less extreme temptations to misperceive, and not to accept them falsely as justifications for anger. And in that same section, he says, my one lesson, which I must teach as I learned, is that no perception which is out of accord with the judgment of the Holy Spirit can be justified. So incidentally, there's an example of the real test of validity. Is this out of accord with the judgment of the Holy Spirit? So here's the important part for this idea, though. He goes on to say, I undertook to show this, meaning he undertook to show that no perception which is out of accord with the judgment of the Holy Spirit can be justified. To show this was true in a very extreme case, merely because this would serve as a good teaching aid to those whose temptations to give into anger and assault would not be as extreme. So those two passages are essentially saying the same thing. He's like, see, if I can teach love in that situation, then surely you can do it in yours. Now, that's obviously a very powerful message. But when we're facing a trigger, the real question is, how did he do that? How was Jesus able to call upon such a reserve of spiritual strength to remain in that state of love while he was being treated so brutally? So to answer that question, I came across something in Cameo 8 that I want to share with you. So this cameo centers on a few instances where Jesus not only doesn't blame Helen and Bill for their wrong thinking, he also doesn't blame them for the effects that result from it. So what he says to Helen and Bill boils down into this neat little process. He says essentially, don't worry about the thing that you did. That's just what you did when you were in a state of wrong-minded thinking. Thankfully, there's another state of right-mindedness in which those errors no longer occur. So don't worry about what happened. It's just how things go when wrong-minded thinking occurs. So for me, what's so amazing about this is just his casualness. Like, they'd really screwed things up, and he's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. That was just your ego thinking. Thankfully, you can just choose again. And I think we can imagine that this is what he might have been thinking on the cross. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do is a form of saying these people are in a state of wrong-minded thinking that's causing this brutal behavior. Ego thinking causes ego effects. That's just how it goes here. But what really matters is not the death of the body. What really matters is the healing of the minds that caused it. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. What a remarkably generous and kind place to be. That's why I believe the Course when it says he was the first to complete his part perfectly. What an amazing, amazing idea. So, as I said, that struck me from the cameo, but I also recently found a place in the text that underscores this idea, so I want to read it to you. He says, miraculous forgiveness involves only correction. This does not mean the ego's correction. This means the healing of the mind. So miraculous forgiveness involves only correction. It has no element of judgment at all. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, in no way evaluates what they do. It is strictly limited to an appeal to God to heal their minds. There is no reference to the outcome of their misthought. There is no reference to the outcome of their misthought. This does not matter. That's what he was saying to Helen and Bill. So I know we're running out of time here, but I do want to unpack this a little bit, because while we should stand in awe of the idea that we can teach only love under any circumstances as course students, we should be internalizing this, not just as a resolution, I think, but we should be internalizing this as course students as a community value. But I do want to warn you that when you stand for this idea, a criticism you will often hear is, isn't this just enabling abusers to continue in their ways? Isn't this just denial at best and dangerous at worst? This is a very serious thing. I've lost friends over this, actually, so I want to be perfectly clear. In the Course, it is bedrock to understand this key idea. As students, we see through the body, through the personality, and even through the character of other people to their invisible divine reality, and that is the basis on which we forgive. And so while we are looking at our hatred, which the Course says throughout that we need to do, there is no bypassing here, we are also being asked to embrace the Course's message of unconditional love and healing. There are many who struggle with the Course's views on forgiveness, but love the idea of Jesus as a radical teacher. Unconditional forgiveness is the radical nature of his message. That was true 2,000 years ago, and that is true today. Love your enemies. So as a thought experiment, imagine just for a moment how Jesus would deal with the worst of what's happening in our world today. Would he say, I'm all for forgiveness, but Putin, that guy is just a bridge too far? Or would he say, there is nothing outside of the scope of forgiveness. Insert anyone or anything into that sentence and ask yourself if there is something from a Course perspective that would be unworthy of forgiveness. You will not find anything. So again, this doesn't mean that we don't look at our stuff. If you've been to our classes, sometimes that seems like that's all we do. There's a new section in the soft cover called The Journey into Fear. It's all about looking at our fear. There's a cameo in the back of the CE called You Do Not Realize How Much You Hate Each Other, where Helen and Bill are asked to confront that idea. There's a part in the manual where it says the teacher of God is willing to reconsider his past decisions if they are causing pain to anyone. We are always being asked to look and to acknowledge and to get involved. The point is, as we are doing these things, we do them with unconditional forgiveness and unconditional love. And so when you hear someone say, isn't that just denial? Respond by saying yes. It is the positive use of denial. I am denying that anything not of God has the power to hurt me in any way. And so from that belief, I can be defenseless and teach only love in this moment because that is what I am. Martin Luther King, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, while railing against the injustices of systemic racism, wrote, "The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice?" In that dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, 3 men were crucified. We must never forget that all 3 of them were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality and thus fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists. I love that. And so that's the point I want to leave you with. Teach only love does not mean don't take action. Jesus took action. Martin Luther King took action. The Course says, listen, learn, and do. The first 2 are not enough. So the question isn't whether to do. The question is only the consciousness in which you are doing it. So those are your 3 resolutions if you choose to accept them. Put truth first. Put your spiritual principles before your ego's desires. Do the work. Don't elevate not doing the work to a spiritual virtue. And teach only love loudly, unapologetically. Love your enemies is the most beautiful message to ever reach this earth. And if we do not stand for that as followers of Jesus, no one will. I have mentioned Marianne Williamson a few times today, and I always love it when she goes on that little riff about, like, if you think love is naive, let me tell you, continuing this culture where we destroy ourselves by putting economic principles above humanitarian principles, that is what's naive. I love her little riffs. So I want to close with what I believe is the only part of the Course that addresses the new year specifically. In chapter 16, the Course says, make this year different by making it all the same. And the idea is that we make the year different by making everything we do about the goal of holiness. So all of our encounters are holy, meaning they're just about the exchange of love. All of our relationships are holy. All of our work is holy, meaning you're just there to represent him who sent you. Your practice is holy. You blow out the cobwebs from the temple of your mind and you light the candle. You take it seriously that your mind is a sacred space. Make this year different. Everything before this moment is gone. Let it go. Take the people around you and start over with all of them. Your parents, your spouse, your partner, your children, take whatever they have done before right now and release it. Release them. Make that the true meaning of new year, new you. We have spent far too much time trying to criticize the old. It is time to create the new. So you can dedicate or rededicate yourself to that today. You can say, I really don't do resolutions, and so it's going to be same year, same old me. Or you can say, I'm going to put truth first. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to teach only love. And maybe I didn't get it right before this moment, but I am committed to showing up from this moment on. And that's what it means to live a spiritual life. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Dave. Beautiful. Well, I knew that was going to be a longer message today, so we have a shorter exercise. So if you would, please close your eyes. It's only about 5 minutes, but take a deep breath with me. And first imagine your mistakes being behind you. All of them. They're in the past. They no longer exist. They don't automatically carry into the present. You have to bring them here. And just feel relief at the thought that you don't have to do that. You don't need to do that. You can leave them right where they are in the past. And now we'll extend this to the mistakes of others. You're welcome to think of someone in particular, or maybe even a group of people. Imagine that all of their mistakes are behind them. All of their mistakes are in the past. All of their mistakes no longer exist. Their mistakes don't carry into the present unless you bring them there. And again, feel the relief that you don't need to do that. You can leave their mistakes in the past. Let's commit to that right now, for this year and beyond. Your mistakes, their mistakes, all in the past. And from this clean slate, give some thought to what spiritual aspirations you carry for the new year. What do you want to achieve spiritually? What kind of person do you want to become? And let's just take a minute of silence as you ask within, what should be my focus for the new year? And listen for an answer. And as you carry on today, think about what you heard. Think about how you can accomplish this. What are the means by which you can accomplish what you heard? And dedicate your year to being the person God would have you be, to do what He would have you do. Amen.
Thank you so much, Emily, for the truly beautiful and powerful message today. I could see the faces and the comments from everyone, and I know I'm not the only one to feel that. So thank you so much for the exercise. Obviously, our time together is almost at an end, but I would like to offer a closing poem from Helen Schuckman's book, The Gifts of God. This one is called The Song of Peace. The melody of peace is always there. It neither dies nor wavers. It remains a calm, soft sound, more still than silence, and an ageless recollection in the minds that God created. Ceaselessly it sings to all the world that it remember Him. The sounds of earth are quieted before this ancient melody, which speaks of love in limitless dimensions. Where is fear when God has guaranteed that he is here. And with those beautiful words and a final thank you to everyone who has contributed today, I'll say goodbye and look forward to seeing you all at the next gathering on Sunday, the 22nd of January. So we really hope you'll join us. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone.